On today's episode, we'll be talking about hellhounds, angels, and psychic energies. These stories and more on this edition of Paranormal Mysteries. Thank you for joining me and welcome. I am your host, Nick Ryan. I hope that everyone's been having a good week so far, and before we start, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for tuning in and supporting the show. If you enjoy what we do here, please consider subscribing, sharing, and reviewing the podcast. This supports us by helping new listeners to discover the show. And if you'd like to support us even further by becoming a patron or by donating, please visit us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. These links and others can be found in the show notes. And of course, if you've encountered the paranormal and would like to share your story, please email me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com. All experiences, no matter how big or small, are always welcome. And with that in mind, our first listener story comes to us from Anonymous. And Anonymous says, "Hi Nick and the whole family of Paranormal Mysteries podcast. I hope you are all doing well. I wrote to you last October, and since then, nothing paranormal has happened, if you don't count any night terror attacks or sleep paralysis. But I am so used to having them around every now and then that I don't pay much attention towards them anymore. And the less I think about them, the less I have them. However, I wanted to contact you and your team, because the last time I wrote to you, I didn't include a couple of stories that I wanted to share. First, some background. I was baptized to Christianity Lutheran in the 80s when I was just a baby, even though our family has never been religious. I would say that we were more culturally grown into it than actually religious. Anyway, as I grew older, the more I grew apart from the church. And finally, when I was 18, I separated from the church, as I did not find the teachings something that had value for me. Nowadays, I would say that I'm an agnostic. Not denying that God doesn't exist, but I do not believe that there is only one big God who rules this all. It's more like I believe there is something, whether it is the universe, gods, aliens, spirits, or we are just trapped in a wormhole. Who knows? But I don't believe that there is a God, like they teach us. Anyway, in 2012, I was 24 and studying in the university, and at the same time I had a part-time job in a local brewery. The shift started at 5 a.m., and sometimes I would get nauseous during these early mornings, as I wasn't a fan of waking up early, and I felt like my energy levels were completely zero at that time of the day. Then one morning I felt so off and nauseous that I almost passed out, and I had to take an early break from work. I had a massive headache, and I felt like vomiting. I was sitting in the kitchen when suddenly this young woman knocked on the door and asked me if I was all right. I had seen her working in the brewery a few times, but I hadn't really recognized her. I told her that I wasn't feeling well and that I was sick to my stomach. And then, out of nowhere, she asked me if I would like her to heal me. I was confused. At the time, I was a skeptic about all these religious healers, etc., and I answered her a bit jokingly that she could try, but you were probably just wasting your time. The woman then told me that she could sense that I had an open mind, and she believed that whatever she could do would work on me. She asked me to sit on a chair, and she walked behind my back, putting her palms on my shoulders, and then to my head. As she did this movement, she kept saying the words, "In the name of Jesus Christ, take this pain away from this girl." She kept saying this like a mantra, and to my surprise, I suddenly felt this energy-like warmth on my shoulders, and how it spread first to my head, and then to my whole body. Then, out of nowhere, I started crying and laughing at the same time. It was like I couldn't control it, and I felt this pure happiness inside of me that I had never felt. The woman asked me, "Are you feeling all right now?" and smiled at me. I couldn't say a word. I was so confused, so happy, and so free at the same time. I didn't feel any pain, nausea, or headache anymore. Just pure joy, calmness, and warmth. A couple of days after this incident, I felt light and happy. I can't explain it well enough, and to this day I'm as confused as I was back in that day, because I can't explain what happened and why. I still don't believe in God, but I do believe in energies, and this moment surely had some weird energies. And guess what's more interesting? I never saw that young woman again in the brewery, or later in my life. My second story is a bit different, but it also had something to do with the universe, destiny, energies, angels, or something. The year was 2015. More specifically, the exact day was Friday the 13th of November. So what could possibly go wrong? On that day, my sister and me were supposed to start our 4-day trip to Paris. We live in Europe, so a trip like this was a common thing to do. But somehow, everything started to go wrong from the very start. Or maybe it was our luck. First of all, our morning flight got delayed, and when we finally got to Paris and found our hotel, it turned out that the hotel was closed, and nobody had informed us. We were exhausted, angry, and hungry, and after a few calls, we finally managed to get a room from a different hotel. At this point, it was already evening, and we were extremely tired, but we decided to go down to have a nice dinner, and maybe a glass of wine in a French bistro bar. The clock was around 9 p.m., and we walked through this one specific street that looked really nice and a fun place to be. A lot of young people, good music, and a lovely atmosphere. But the day had been mostly a nightmare, so we decided to call it a night and come back the next day. So we walked straight to the hotel. Later that night, around 12:30 a.m., when we both were fully asleep, my phone rang, and my boyfriend called me in a panic, asking me where we were. First, I thought something bad had happened to our parents or to our friends, but it wasn't that. My boyfriend was almost sobbing and told me that there had been a huge terrorist attack in Paris just now, and hundreds of people had been shot to death in a concert hall, and a few more attacks had been made on the restaurant and bar streets, and no one knew if there would be more. We turned the TV on, and to our shock, we realized something. Our hotel was just under 1 kilometer away from the nearest attack, and what was even more shocking was that we had been on that very same bar street just an hour before the attack started. It was the very same street that we thought looked so lovely and alive. Our heads were full of horror scenarios. What if our plane would have been on time? What if our hotel hadn't been closed? What if we would have had the energy to stay up late? And what if we had been on that street just an hour later? I know it doesn't make you feel any better to play all these scenarios inside of your head, but this time, all this made me wonder if there really is a destiny for all of us, and maybe it just wasn't our time yet. There's no need to tell you that the next hours and days were the worst of our lives. We wanted to leave France, but all the flights were sold out, so we had to stay in the city. There was a curfew, there were armed police and soldiers everywhere, and the once so loud and lively city was suddenly all quiet. A few days later, my sister was at work. At this time, she was working as a physiotherapist, and part of her job was to do these home visits to patients' houses to see how they were doing and living. This one patient was an elderly lady who had become really fond of my sister, and on this specific day, after the trip to Paris, the lady asked my sister if she believed in angels. My sister answered confused, "Not really. Why?" And the old lady said, "I have been seeing these 2 angels, both women, who follow you wherever you go. They are here to protect you, and they are always there, just a few meters behind you. I thought you should know." I hope you are having a great day. Please feel free to share these stories if you like. Cheers. Anonymous. Our next story of the night comes to us from Daniel, and Daniel's story is called Korean Shamanism. Daniel says, "Nick, I've been a listener of the podcast for the last year or so, and have wanted to write in my experience for quite some time. Your show has offered me a lot of entertainment and education during such a weird period of my life. Here is a little bit about me. I grew up in a very conservative Catholic household. I am still a practicing Catholic, although I take a worldly and liberal approach to how I practice my faith. There is so much that we do not know, and I try to keep my mind open to the unexpected and the unexplained. After graduating from university, I moved to South Korea, and I lived there from 2014 to 2018. While in the country, I experienced a number of strange occurrences, which seem to all have a common connection. Most of my friends were Korean, and my best friend, we'll call him Jay, came from a long lineage of Korean shamans. Shamanism in Korea has a lot to do with ancestral honor and worship, reverence to the spirits of the ancient mountains, and even some dark magical elements as well. He was hesitant to tell me about his family since it can be a pretty taboo practice, so I didn't learn about it until my second year of living there. I'm a pretty open-minded person, and seeing as I had never really dealt with that in the US, I thought to take it as a learning experience. Over the next year or so, I would visit his house and get to know his family. Nothing very strange happened for a while, apart from his mother texting me words of caution against looking strangers in the eyes, going to certain locations in the city, and eating certain foods. I was usually on edge for days when she would tell me these things, but nothing actually happened. Me and Jay ended up moving in together, and this is when things started to get interesting. Jay refused to have his mother cleanse the house before we moved in, saying, quote, "I'll do it," but he never ended up doing it. His mother told Jay one day that a spirit was hanging around outside of their house in the countryside. According to her, the spirit wore clothes that were from the early 1900s, had red hair, and would never enter the yard. Jay asked me about my heritage, and I told him that I was Irish, but I didn't know of any ancestors that had traveled to Korea during that time. Both him and his mom insisted that he would hang around outside of their house after I visited on weekends, and then would disappear. I thought that it could be my guardian angel or something like that, so it seemed kind of neat. Fast forward a few months later, me and Jay are visiting this famous temple in the mountains. We were standing outside of the car when Jay looks past me and off into the distance. I knew that he saw something that I didn't. He got very serious and started saying things in Korean. My Korean is very good, but I couldn't understand the dialogue. He said, "Dude, there is a spirit of a soldier from the Korean War walking towards us with a limp. He's making this sound. Sk, sk, sk. His head is bent to one side, and there is blood all over him. We should probably get going." We both left and didn't talk about it again. I kind of didn't believe him. I was dating a Korean girl during this time who didn't approve of our friendship. She was a very devout Baptist, and she thought his family was very sinful. She would stay over sometimes, but she often said she never felt safe in my house. I said that there was nothing there and that it was a safe place to be, but she never felt that way. About a month after we broke up, I had my first true paranormal experience. My house was next to a restaurant which had a very bright white neon sign that would shine light through the kitchen window. For this reason, I always closed my bedroom door at night. One night, however, I didn't. I remember waking up with the distinct feeling that I was being watched and that there was something or someone else in the room. I looked in the doorway, and I could see the silhouette of a female figure with long hair, similar to the stereotypical Asian ghosts portrayed in films like The Ring or A Tale of Two Sisters. I knew she was looking at me, and I remember the feeling of utter fear. I quickly pulled the comforter over my head and stayed under the covers until at least 10 the next morning. Jay wasn't there that night, so I called him and told him what had happened. He told his mother, and she asked if he had cleansed the house like he said. He admitted that he had forgotten, but didn't feel like there was anything in the house. I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. I could feel it in my entire body, and there was a dark presence in the house. He returned back the next day and did a cleansing ritual. I didn't see the ghost again. A few months later, I decided that it was time for me to return back to the US, and that my time in South Korea was up. Before moving out, Jay wanted to perform a final ritual so that any dark energy or other forces that were there wouldn't come back with me to the US. While I was in the other room preparing some documents, he was praying in the room next door. I could hear him singing traditional songs and hitting his drum. He then suddenly stopped and started having a conversation with himself. Or so I thought. His speaking was similar to that I had heard while we were at the temple several months before. He was speaking like this for a while, and then he started talking to me. He said, "Daniel, I'm speaking with a spirit who is dressed in all white and is not Asian. She is telling me to tell you that you can't get a car when you go back to the US." I then explained that the public transportation is very bad in my city and that I needed to buy a car. He continued speaking with the other person, and that is when it took a dark turn. He spoke to me again, saying that the lady was pulling on his arm and was insisting that I don't get a car. I told him that it was very necessary for me to get one. He resumed speaking with her and finally said to me, "You need to be very careful in the next few months. You will be in a very bad car accident." I then said that I would be careful and I would do my best to avoid the accident. After I moved back to the US, I was invited to a wedding in Florida for one of my other good Korean friends who had met a girl while living abroad doing his internship. It was about 11 at night, and we had just picked up two of his friends from the airport. We were heading down a long, dark highway in the Florida countryside. It was raining, and we all were being very cautious, wearing seatbelts, and had not been drinking. Out of nowhere, a drunk driver hit us. He must have been going at least 90 miles per hour, and he sent us flipping multiple times off the road. We managed to escape the car, and nobody was seriously hurt. What we didn't know was that we were about 10 feet from the railroad tracks, and that a train had just come by. By some miracle, all of us had climbed out of the totaled car, and had lived to tell the tale. The next morning, I gave my friend Jay a call, and he immediately asked me if I was all right. I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I know you were in a car crash last night." I then told this to my friends who were with me, and they were immediately very silent. Call it what you will, but I'm determined that there are people with special abilities in this world. I am very fortunate to have had these experiences and to have had survived that car accident, and I am very thankful to whatever or whoever protected me during my paranormal encounter, and especially during that car crash. I still consider Jay to be one of my best friends, and I can't wait to go back to Korea when I'm able to travel again. Thank you for letting me share these experiences with you. Daniel. Our next story of the night comes to us from Tressa, and Tressa's story is called 7 Gates of Hell. Tressa says, I live in southern Illinois, and there is one town named Collinsville. Outside of this town, on some back roads, there are these gates, underpasses, and bridges that all have a terrible story about how they became haunted and are known as the 7 Gates of Hell. You are supposed to go under each bridge slowly, but you do not go under the last gate until midnight sharp. The purpose of this is because while you are there, if you see a hellhound's red eyes staring at you, they will drag your soul to hell. This last gate is between 2 wooded hills, and this is important to remember. Now that that is known, I can go on with my story. My aunt and her sister came down to visit us from upstate New York. Since they share the same love of the paranormal as my mom and I, we would go out looking for haunted places to experience, and my mom and I told them about the 7 gates of hell. We went to each gate, got out of the car, and experienced each gate, one by one, in awe. We got to the last bridge about 10 minutes early, so we parked the car about 100 feet from the bridge and decided to get out and take some pictures. Once we were all out of the car and started exploring around, my aunt and I decided to keep a lookout for this red truck that had been following us, and it sped off once they realized that we saw them. It was suspiciously quiet, and all that my aunt and I heard was a twig snap. We looked at each other and gave each other the look like, "Did you hear that?" At this point, my mom and my sister's aunt came back over to us, and another twig snapped. It was like something was very slowly trying to sneak up on us. We shined our flashlights up the hill, and not surprising, nothing was there. We then turned our flashlights off, and what we heard next terrified us, which is an understatement. The only thing I could compare the sound to would be 2 giant trees falling and rolling down the hill with supersonic speed without hitting anything. I have never seen 3 50-year-old women move that fast in my entire life. Once we were safe in the car, we took a picture out the window to see if we could get anything on camera. And to our amazement, there we saw it. A hellhound right outside my window. If it wasn't for the glass, the hellhound and I would have been touching noses. I spoke with Tressa and inquired about this picture, and she informed me that she was in the process of locating it. And if she's able to send it to me, I'll be posting it on the forum as well. As tonight's edition of Paranormal Mysteries comes to a close, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in, and a special thank you goes out to Anonymous, Daniel, and Tressa for sharing their experiences. If you've witnessed something that you can't explain, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit us at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy rest of the week, and we'll see you back here on Friday as we uncover even more experiences involving paranormal mysteries.